We're doing a series through Song of Solomon. We call it the Song of Love. We're looking at the different pictures from the photo album of the life of Solomon and Shulamith in the Song of Solomon. Our lesson today is called A Sleepy Bride, and we're going to take our text from the 5th chapter and verse 2 through verse 8. She is speaking and she says, "I sleep, but my heart is awake. It is the voice of my beloved. He knocks, saying, 'Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is covered with dew, and my locks with the drops of the night.'" A sleepy bride. It's a very interesting lesson. I want to point out a couple of things in this verse I just read to you. First of all, it's obvious from the verse that they're no longer newlyweds. We don't know how long they've been married, but obviously they're past that newlywed stage. When he speaks to her, he calls her my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. But there's one phrase he leaves out that he used in chapter 4 several times. That's my spouse or my bride, my wife. And this indicates there has been enough time that they are no longer newlyweds. The second thing I want to point out from that verse of scripture is he talks about his head is covered with dew, his locks with the drops of the night. Now that tells us he's coming home late, because the dew does not begin to fall until late in the evening. Past midnight is usually where you're going to begin to see the dew begin to gather. And so this is what the scripture reference shows us here. The honeymoon is over, and the king and the queen have settled into the routine of ruling the nation. They're getting down to business. And if you think you're busy, think about the king and the queen. Everybody wants an audience with the king. Everybody, whatever their problem is, they want to go to the top. If they can talk to the king, they believe they're going to get what they need in their life. So if you think your life is busy, your marriage is busy, put yourself in their shoes for just a moment. How busy this couple must have been. And so I want to begin the first part of this lesson and talk about busy lovers. Busy lovers. Now, nobody's doing anything wrong here as far as intentional or deliberate. Nobody's trying to hurt anybody. No, they're just going through the routine of life. But here's the warning that we must all beware in our marriage relationships. Don't take your spouse for granted. I think this is a common mistake. There's an old cliche that says, familiarity breeds contempt. And I've seen men that would treat a perfect stranger, a lady they've never met before, better than they treat their wives. Well, that is a big mistake, And vice versa. I've seen the same thing, wives that did the same thing to a husband. Don't take your spouse for granted. It is a gift that God has given in your life. See, the problem is we get so busy with life. Someone has said the problem with life is it comes so daily, day after day after day. And we get so busy with everything that we don't have time for those that we love. Now that's a mistake. With your spouse, with your children, with your grandchildren, we've got to make time. Boy, this is one of the things I credit my wife with, and I'm so thankful. She has always fought for the family. I mean, special days. She hasn't asked a lot of me, but on birthdays, on special holidays, I want you here for the family because I've traveled so much. And I'm glad. I'm so glad that she did, because if she hadn't, I probably would have lost my family because of neglect. Not that I didn't care. It's just I'm so busy saving the world that I'm neglecting my own children. That is a big mistake. And so this is what we see here. Solomon is busy and she is tired. Boy, you know what that is? That is a perfect recipe for trouble in the marriage. And that's what we see begins to arise here in this story. That already, and they haven't been married that long, but they're already having difficulty in communicating with each other because they are just so busy. They're no longer newlyweds. They're past that stage. And Solomon is keeping long hours in the office. As I've said, he probably has got home after midnight this time. He comes in late, and his wife is already asleep when he returns from work. Oh my, it's a perfect recipe for trouble, and that's what we see happening here. Now, the second part of the lesson is what I'm going to call the lazy lover. The lazy lover. And this focuses in primarily upon her response to him. As Solomon comes, he goes to a room. Now, you've got to remember, we're not talking about just average couple, and a modest little cottage somewhere. No, they are the king and the queen. So they've got a palace. There's no telling how many rooms are in this palace. And she's got her own special quarters. He has come intentionally to her room to see his new bride. But as he knocks on her door, her response is, in verse 3, I have taken off my robe. How can I put it on again? Let me pause for a moment. Every time I read that, I want to answer her and say, the same way you took it off. Put it back on. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. She's just giving an excuse. And then she says, I have washed my feet. How can I defile them? Now, notice what she's doing. She has locked her door to her husband. Beware of that. Beware of putting up barriers, locking the door, doing things that's going to create barriers between you and the person you love the most. She's sleepy, and she doesn't want to be bothered. Now, you ladies, please listen to me. I remember listening to a wise woman's words, and she was addressing some other wives, and she said to them, the time you spent resisting your husband's love overtures, probably if you would have just went along, it would have been over a lot quicker than the time that you spent in resisting him. Well, there's wise words in that, but she's simply tired. The common cliche, I've got a headache. Well, that's why they make Tylenol and aspirin and such. It's for problems like this. But what's happening is she's forgotten her humble beginnings. She's forgotten it's the king that loves her. Oh, yes. And I think so many times we do the same thing. We begin to take each other for granted, and we forget this is that special person that won my heart with their love. And it can go both ways here for husbands and wives. He, of course, is a part of the problem. But basically, I would ask this question. She's forgotten why she washed her feet. I mean, if you're not going to have a husband coming home, then it don't matter whether you go to bed with dirty feet or not. Why do you want to wash your feet? She's forgetting her situation. In verse 4 and 5, it's interesting the way that Solomon responds. When she doesn't answer the door, she just says, I'm sleepy, basically is what she's saying. Don't bother me now. My beloved put his hand to the latch of the door, and my heart yearned for him. I rose to open to my beloved, and my hands dropped with myrrh. That's a sweet-smelling spice. My fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the lock. Now notice what's happening here. Solomon tries to open the door only to discover it's locked. He can't get in. Now, this is the mistake that so many men make at that point. They raise their voice, or some men don't get angry. They just pout. And they let their feelings be known, how displeased they are with their wife. He doesn't start beating on the door. You open this door, I'm going to break it down. No. He doesn't do any of that. He simply takes some of his perfume, the liquid myrrh, and places it upon the lock and departs. Why? Solomon understands we cannot force love. It is impossible. You can't force love. Love is a choice of the heart. And so he doesn't do any of this. Rather, he just simply, spoke to her and then quietly withdrew after leaving some of his perfume. Now, I want to point something out here that's a spiritual truth, but I've experienced this in my relationship with Christ. There have been times when Jesus has asked me to do things that I didn't want to do. And I say no. He doesn't answer. He doesn't argue. He never comes down to your level to argue with you. You know what he does? He simply puts his hand to the hole of the door and lets you see his hand. And when you look at the hand of Jesus, what do you see? The nail scars in his hands. And you realize how much he loved me and you. He simply reveals his love, and then he withdraws from us to let us think it over, to let us make the choice. So I see in the thing that Solomon is doing is the same way that Christ responds to us. Now, the truth is, Solomon's behavior here is part of the problem. It's not all her problem. He gets home late at night after she's already gone to bed, is asleep, and then he comes in and is waking her up. And of course, he's been in the office. He's been dealing with the problems of the kingdom, and he brings all of this home, but she's asleep. She's in a different world, a different role model here. And so he's a part of this problem. He come home late at night and chose an inopportune time for lovemaking. Now, as men, we've got to be very careful in this area. I think so many times that when you stand before an altar of holy matrimony and you say, I do take this woman to be my wife, and then she says, I do take this man to be my husband, it's like we take our handkerchief, wipe our brow, and say, I'm glad that one's over, I won that one, and we're on to our next big victory. Because as men, that's the way we think. We're conquerors. No, you can never think of your wife as someone that you conquer. No, if you think you're going to have a lot of problems in your marriage if you begin thinking like that. He is a part of the problem here. He's not been showing attention to her. And he realized his mistake. When he does, he doesn't quarrel with her. He doesn't call her names. He doesn't get angry, upset, pout. No, he simply takes some of his cologne, puts it on the lock of the door because he knew sooner or later she's going to open that door. And what he wants is her to smell his perfume the moment she opens the door. That's why he's doing this. And then he just quietly departs and leaves. I hope you're understanding. The third part of this story, I want to call it the lost lover. The lost lover. And we're going to carry this over into the next lesson. In verse 6, she is speaking and she said, I opened to my beloved, and my beloved had turned away and was gone. My heart leaped up when he spoke, and I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, but he gave me no answer. So Solomon is quietly withdrawn to other quarters in the palace. And she realizes now her mistake. The mistake that she has made. She's a queen, but she's living like a widow. What a tragedy. I mean, here this woman is. She has been chosen by Solomon, the greatest king on earth, to be his bride. And yet, she's living like a widow. That is a terrible, terrible mistake. And so she makes the right decision. She's going to go try to find him. She begins seeking him to be reconciled to him. And as I said, we're going to carry this over into the next lesson as we see her seeking after finding her beloved. And so I want to emphasize here with the lost lover, if there is anything that has come, a barrier, a locked door, something between you and your spouse, resolve, I'm going to settle this as quickly as I can. I'm going to start seeking to try to find the answer, the solution, so that we can have the relationship that we once enjoyed. And I can assure you, if you will make that decision, you're going to be making the right decision. And hopefully you will be able to quickly restore the relationship, as we see is what happens in the rest of this story. Now, I want to conclude this lesson by going back to the marriage relationship and talk about God's purposes for the sexual act. For so many people, it is nothing more than just an animal act. That is why, but God is the one that designed sex. And the Bible said everything that God made was good. So let's look at 5 different purposes that I see in the Scripture that God intends to be used and utilized in the sexual act. The first one is to become one flesh. And I take this from Genesis 2:24. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. That word literally means to stick to his wife. Be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. That is God's goal. God's goal is 2 shall become one. See, there is this need in all of humanity. It's what psychologists call skin hungry. Skin hungry. There is the need to be touched. Marriage sanctifies our need for intimacy. It's God's plan. It's God's purpose. And so he's saying in this that 2 shall become one. That's one of the purposes that God has intended for the sexual act. The second thing is, it's the power of procreation. It's actually a God-like power. We're not the creator, we are procreators. God has given to us the ability to bring into being, to create something that never existed before. And I think when both of our daughters were born, I tell you, I never felt so helpless, so small in all of my life. As I look at this tiny, tiny baby that they put in my arms, this baby, and I don't know about other men, but I tell you, women handle babies totally different than what men do. They'll take them, flip them over, and I mean, they're doing, man, I felt like I was holding a China doll. Something is going to break if I don't hold it properly, you know. And oh my, I never felt so small, so insignificant in my life. In Genesis 1:28, he says, God blessed them, and God said, be fruitful and multiply the earth and fill the earth and subdue it. Procreation is one of God's purposes for marriage. It is one of the reasons why he has designed it, for the ability to bring into life another generation that never existed before. The third thing that I see is what I'm going to call a new dimension of communication. And I take this from Genesis 4:1, where it says, now Adam knew Eve, his wife. Does that mean he had never met her before? No, that's not what he's saying. That's not what he's saying. And if you go back and read it from the original language, the word there, to know, he knew, means experimental knowledge. What he's simply saying, he experienced Eve in a way he's never experienced her before. It's a new dimension of communication, 2 becoming one. This is one of the purposes of God in the sexual act. The fourth one is, it is a a ministry of comfort and encouragement. In 2 Samuel 12 and 24, it's talking about David and Bathsheba. This is after their sin. It's after the baby has died that was born as a result of their immorality. But they are married now, and being married, there's something that says that David understood he could comfort, and the word means to encourage, to strengthen his wife. That included the sexual relationship. And so if men understand this, and if it's used in the proper way, and I don't think it's just for men, I think women can do the same thing, that you understand that in the sexual act, there is more than just a physical act. There is two are becoming one, and something can happen that encourages your spouse and helps them through some of those difficult moments in life when they experience the romance of true love. And then the last one I would like to say is sex is beautiful in itself. It's the world that has taken sex and twisted it into something dirty, twisted it into something, and so many comedians, they cannot tell jokes without turning sexual in their jokes. And they get laughs of it, of course. That's why they're doing it. But what they're doing is perverting something that God created, which was good, which was pure, which was beautiful. In Song of Solomon, chapter 7, and verse 10, she says, I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. Now notice that word, desire. His desire is toward me. In the Old Testament, that word desire, the Hebrew word, is only found 3 times. It's found here in Song of Solomon 7 and 10, but it is also found in Genesis 3 and 16, where God is saying unto Eve, after they have sinned in the garden, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Now, back in Song of Solomon, it is saying his desire is toward her. Here in this verse, it's saying her desire is toward her husband. And then in Genesis 4 and 7, this is where Cain was angry at God because his offering had not been accepted. And God warns him about sin. He's saying, sin is crouching at the door. It's like a wild animal ready to take control of your life. And he said, sin's desire is for you, and you should rule over it. Now, those are the 3 times that we find this word desire. What it is showing is only love can truly make us equal. How can you take a peasant girl and make her equal with the greatest king on planet Earth? How can you take people, sinners, those that have done wrong, that have failed, and make them one with Jesus Christ? And yet that is what is promised in the Scripture. There's only one way it can be done. That's through love. Love is what makes unequals equal. It's the only thing, the only power that can do it. And so that's what we find here in this story. And when we talk about the sexual act, it is more than just a physical act. It is to be an act of love. An act of love. As an act of love, it takes 2, and they become equal. They become one. No wonder Paul talked about this, and he said, this is a great mystery, how that a man shall leave father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they two shall become one flesh. And then he said, it's a great mystery, but I'm speaking to you also concerning Christ and the church. And so we see in this story how that going back to the Garden of Eden, where the word desire was first introduced to us, there paradise was home. Now home becomes a paradise. I've told my wife this many times over the years, particularly back during the days when we were young pastors and I was dealing with some major challenges in the church and community. And I can remember telling her this several times, honey, I can fight the devil all day long. I can face hell all day long if I can come home to just a little bit of heaven. Boy, you know what I'm talking about. That relationship, the relationship between husband and wife, paradise used to be the home in the Garden of Eden, but now home becomes our paradise. It becomes the place where we can retreat together in a safe, secure environment where we are loved. And so I warn you, the story is about laziness and busyness. And it doesn't matter who you're married to or how good your marriage is. Laziness and busyness can kill a relationship. Don't allow that to happen to your relationship. And do like the Shulamith. She made the decision, I'm going to be reconciled to my husband. And she was, much quicker than she even thought was possible. I believe the same is for us. When we make the decision, I'm going to improve my marriage. I'm going to make some decisions that's going to help improve my love, the relationship I have with my husband or my wife. And so I thank God for this story because it brings to us so much truth that we can use in our own marriages. So may God bless you and prosper you in your journey of faith and as you build strong marriages with one another.